Welcome back to the McCoy Leadership Podcast, elevating your impact through valuable insights and conversations about leadership. Welcome back to another episode of the McCoy Leadership Podcast. And today we have John Knowlton with us. And John and his wife, Julie, have realized an abundant life. And I don't know that I got to give any more explanation than that, but they believe that our outcomes are rooted in our thinking. John, welcome. And I will let you give a little bit of your background and how did you end up where you are today, coaching and helping businesses?
Well, Amos, thank you so much. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and share with your listeners. So I've been a bivocational guy my whole career. I've been a part-time pastor and a full-time business guy and a full-time dad and a full-time husband. And so we all wear lots of hats, and I understand that. And I'll tell you, kind of stumbled into a career that I was good at. And that is I became a wealth management guy, back in the 90s, selling stocks, bonds, and mutual funds and learning the craft of financial planning. And over time, developed small teams, ultimately bought out a partner and realized, you can get clients one at a time, or you can buy them in chunks. And I liked buying them in chunks, which is, that's a different skill set to develop. In other words, not just talking to Bob and Sue about their retirement plan, but talking to Ralph, who's been in the business for 30 years, about entrusting his life's work with me and my team. And then, of course, as an organization grows, the leader does less and less of the frontline work and more of influencing. In other words, doing the work through other people. And that's the skill of leadership that I had to develop and stub my toe lots of times and run my face into a glass wall before, and ultimately built an organization that managed over $1 billion of client assets with offices in 3 states and a partner group. And at the end of 2020, a couple things happened. One is we had hit my business. And secondly, one of our adopted children was ready to come home from a residential treatment facility. And my wife raised her hand and said, "Hey, I think I'm going to need some extra help." And so I sold my interest to the team, to the partner team, and that organizations continue to grow, and they're over $3 billion now. So that was a really great transition experience.
So out of that, one question, it just kind of hit me, and I know for a fact that one of our listeners actually reached out maybe 2 months ago and asked a similar question. And I'm curious your standpoint. You've been bivocational and you've been in ministry and business, and those two things simultaneously. Have you ever had the experience where your day job and your ministry and or maybe your day job is the ministry and your other job is part-time, however you want to look at that, where they collide, where you feel like what I need to do here today for my wealth management company and what I'm trying to do over here don't align? And how do you handle that?
Oh, boy. Has anybody had a scheduling conflict or more buckets to fill than you've got water? Sure, of course. Yeah. And I think it really is important to be clear about your mission. That's true for an organization. It's true for a person. It's true for a family. Why are we here? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? And so a good clarity about mission helps you. It arbitrates, right? It helps you say yes to things and no to things. And is this issue, this need, this desire, is it aligned with my mission? Or which of these two things of competing demands, which of them is aligned with mission? And so you might realize, gosh, I need to train up somebody else to help, or I need to hire somebody else, or what have you. I've got an interesting story about that. on the M&A side if you want to get into it. But so just to reiterate, mission, vision, and values really help you to decide where to put time and effort. So clarity about mission. Why are we here? What are we trying to accomplish? Vision is that compelling a future state where if we're successful in the mission, the vision describes how will the world be different in the future. And then values are the ways that we're going to interact with the world. What are the characteristics and the behavioral characteristics that we as an organization or me as a person are going to try to live by in the world.
What would be your advice? Because oftentimes I will hear things. We work with folks on when I'm coaching an individual. One of the first things we start to talk about is putting together your personal mission statement, your values, and your vision. And oftentimes we'll work that through and we get it put together. And maybe this is just a person that wants to lead someday, but right now, today, they're, low level, middle level management. So they truly have a job. They don't get to dictate what happens on a day-to-day basis. And one day they find out that I need to do this thing and it doesn't fit my personal mission. And I don't mean that it's a bad thing. I just mean that this is going in a different direction. And sometimes people will come and ask the question, well, is it okay? I got to have a paycheck. I can't quit my job. I got a family at home. So is it okay to say, well, I'm going to do this thing that doesn't align with my mission until I find something else? Or do you say, I quit, I'm done, I'm out of here, and you get in line at the soup kitchen? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, Amos, I think we all have a moral obligation to take care of our family. And so quitting your job without a source of income is probably pretty irresponsible unless there's some real serious moral violation. Like if they're trying to ask you to take people out to a strip club or something like this for customer appreciation, that might be a deal breaker. But if it's just the job is no longer aligned with where you think your calling is or your purpose, then I think it probably makes sense to revisit, make sure you're clear on your purpose. If you're married, get your wife or your husband on board, and then start to search for a better match. But moral, ethical, and legal, is, if what you're being asked to do is within that confines, I would say keep your job and look for a better match.
You said something there, just reminded me of a funny story. Many, many years ago, when I was at work at one of my concrete block manufacturing places, we had truck drivers out in the road every day. And anyhow, one day, not too far away from that plant was one of these questionable establishments with dancers. And one day I'm driving down the road and I look over and I see one of our company dump trucks sitting along the road at this place. And now, I'm faced with a decision like, what do I do here? And well, we can't have this. So I go to investigate. And
I take it they weren't pouring footings or something.
No. And so I get to the door of this place and I'm like, do I even go in or what do I do? And so I open the door and here stands one of my best truck drivers, straight as an arrow, so on and so forth. And the look on his face was just priceless. And he's like, it is not what it looks like. And anyhow, I got to talking to him. He broke down. And this was in the days before cell phones. And so he had no way but to walk to the closest place, which was right there. And he kind of told the story. He's like, I don't believe in this kind of stuff. I don't believe in these places. He said, but I had a choice. He said, the next place is like 5 miles down the road. He said, so in the best interest of everybody involved in the company, I chose to swallow my fears. And I walked in and asked to use the phone. And anyhow, what has always stuck with me about that story is, as well, there are some times that you will find yourself in positions that do not line up with you morally, but you have no choice. You know, you have to do something to get yourself out of that position. Anyhow, but the funny part of the story was the look on his face when he thought, "Oh no, you know what's happened here."
Yeah.
So you've also spent some time in prison. Well, not in prison, but in prisons as a chaplain. I'll be careful how I say that. I have a friend that is part of our men's group. He was a prison guard, and he often starts conversations. Well, before I got out of prison, and of course that makes people kind of, like say, what do you mean? But you spent a fair amount of time in the prisons as a chaplain, and, getting into one of your thoughts is many times what happens to us is derived from our thinking. What are some of the lessons that you've maybe learned as being a chaplain in a prison?
Well, that's a real interesting chapter of my life. And I was a jail chaplain in the suburbs of Chicago. And also, when I was a younger man in college, did some ministry in the state prison system in Michigan. But in any case, I'll tell you quickly 3 stories of 3 different men I met in the Chicago area, from the Chicago area. The first 2 were in the jail. And the one guy had been a truck driver, driving 18-wheelers, and he was using crack cocaine to stay awake so he could drive longer. So he's smoking crack, driving a semi. And I met him in the jail, and he could not understand what was wrong with just using something that would help him do his job better. The second guy was really interesting. He was a trustee. In jails or prisons, they have a select number of inmates who are highly trusted, therefore trustees, and they would let them have a little job, like doing maintenance or custodial work around the facility and emptying trash cans and things like that. And he had a really good personality, friendly guy. And I kind of wondered, why is this guy in jail? And so he shared with me that he always wanted to be special and different. And so his approach when he was not in jail was to not have a job, because everybody had a job, but he wanted to be different. So he didn't have a job. And then that led him to, he needed money, so he'd sell some drugs and then get arrested. When he was in jail, nobody had a job and he wanted to be different. So he did whatever it took to become a trustee. And so both those guys had this really selfish orientation. They were not thinking about other people. The guy driving the semi was not thinking about how his judgment or reactions could be impaired by taking drugs while he's driving a semi on the highways in Chicago. And the second guy was really selfish, only thinking about himself. How could he be different? How could he be special, without considering how he might use his skills and talents to benefit other people? The third guy from Chicago grew up in a real similar household with those other guys. All the bad stuff that can happen to kids happened: fatherless household, substance abuse, addiction, domestic violence, all that kind of stuff. But something happened. There was a teacher in his life who let him know that he had some aptitude for schooling. And he kept at school. He stayed with it. He studied. He went to college. He went to medical school and became an anesthesiologist. Now, listen, this is a guy who comes from a family where everybody is dependent on drugs. They're controlled by substances. And he chose as his life's work anesthesiology, where he controls substances for other people's benefits. So 3 guys from Chicago, similar backgrounds. The one guy has a mindset of helping other people rather than a selfish mindset. And what a difference. He never went to jail. He had a great career, became a owner of a anesthesiology practice. It's rooted in our thinking. Do I think that I need to extract from the world, that I need to be a taker? that I need to get mine? Or is it I need to find a way to give and to benefit other people? And you see the drastic difference in outcomes between those two mindsets.
So how do you change your thinking? I mean, so I've shared before. I come from a split home, and my both of my parents were alcoholic when I was very young. One went into recovery, one didn't. And I learned from that experience that at the end of the day, is somebody that has those issues, they if they change and they become undependent on whatever it is that they're dependent upon, that doesn't change who they are. It's their thinking, to your point,
Sure.
that changes who they are. So if you never get any help and never change that thinking, so what are possibly some catalysts for somebody that's listening to help them change their thinking?
Sure. Well, as far as we know, we are unique amongst all the creatures in the universe in that we can think about what we think about. We can be self-reflective. And so I think it was St. Francis who said, I can't stop a bird from landing on my shoulder, but I can choose to shoo it away. So we all have unbidden thoughts, things that enter our minds, and they might be thoughts about self-pity, how people done me wrong, how my life is rotten, the revenge. My son talks about rage bait, these videos and clips and whatever that comes through on the internet or on our phones that we know is going to make us angry, and we click it anyways. So we have unbidden thoughts, but we also have the ability to capture those thoughts. Paul of Tarsus said, take every thought captive. And so we have the ability to say, you know what, that thought or that line of thinking is not going to lead to a good end for me, and make a decision to think about something else. And so I encourage people to have a default that when they notice bad thinking, they switch. They can say, oh my gosh, I'm on a rut that's in a bad line of thinking. I'm going to substitute it with this thing. So you don't have to make up something on the spot, but you've got a default. One of my kids struggled with anxiety when it was time to go to bed when they were young. And so before bed, we would rehearse. Hey, what is something you can think about when you start to get anxious? And I'd encourage him to say it out loud. Okay, good. When you feel this way, you're going to think about whatever it was, a toy, an experience with grandma and grandpa, or whatever the case. And so I'll tell you some stinking thinking that I identified in myself recently at a coffee shop. Coffee's important. I'm not addicted to it. I could stop anytime. But, I'm just have a regular relationship with my coffee. And I normally buy black drip coffee because it's fast, right? They don't have to do any fancy espressos or syrups or anything like that. Well, in any case, I happen to be at a coffee shop, and there's people in front of me who weren't quite sure what they wanted. And when they did figure it out, it was complicated drinks that required extra time and things like that. And probably because I hadn't had any coffee yet, I was irritable, and I didn't say anything, but I noticed myself thinking, these slow people are in my way. They are stopping me from getting what I want. And then I noticed I was thinking about the staff at the coffee shop, the baristas, and they were not getting me what I wanted. And I realized, Amos, that when we've got a wrong mindset, or we're not thinking right, people cease to be people, and instead we turn them into objects. And there's two versions of this, how we objectify people. They are either obstacles in our way, or they are tools to get what we want. The people in front of me in line were obstacles, and the baristas were tools to get what I want. Because I wasn't thinking right, I didn't see them as people with potential and histories and past and created in the image of their creator, but rather objects. And so I noticed that. And so now my default, when I start to feel that irritation, if I'm standing in line, is I just recite King David's most famous psalm, Psalm 23. So that's my default. Oh, I'm not going to lack anything. Hey, I've got help. I've got abundance in front of me. I've got a table that's set before me in the presence of my enemies, right? And so that's my default. So long answer to your question, which is I would encourage people to be self-aware of what are they thinking about, and then have a positive replacement always at hand.
I like that because even myself, I know I often wonder why the people at the coffee shop or the bank or wherever it is that I'm at, I don't understand why they don't know my schedule and understand that I have things to do. And often I got to remind myself that I bet you they have things to do too.
What do you know?
Yeah, I'm not the only person with a calendar. I have that same struggle with my daughter's 11 years old. She's in 5th grade, and oftentimes the school system will send out an event or what have you 2 weeks in advance. And for me, 2 weeks in advance is nowhere. I mean, like I now I got to juggle things in my calendar and so on and so forth. And why can't they, but at the end of the day, they have certain deadlines and certain things that they need to do as well. So I find that very useful myself. Now, you also speak about the role of faith and purpose in helping individuals align their thinking with their personal goals. We talked a little bit at the beginning about a mission, but I want to ask that question kind of in two parts. As soon as somebody heard me say faith and purpose, if they are not believers in Christ, they probably are starting to tune things out. And so the first question is, how do you relate faith and purpose to someone maybe, just on the street, not from a biblical standpoint, but how can faith and purpose still help someone?
Yeah, well, back to the oldest origin stories that we know of, in Genesis chapter 1 and then chapter 2, there's kind of two versions of it. These are ancient stories, maybe 3 or 4 millennia old, or maybe older in oral form. But they both agree that people have a purpose. So in the first version of that story, God's created the physical world, and then the plants, and then the animals, and then the people, and gave them a charge to have rulership, to rule over the world. And sometimes we think of that as a bad thing, but look at anything that doesn't have good leadership, and it turns out yucky, right? Yep. An organization that doesn't have good leadership doesn't accomplish its mission. A lawn that's not tended by somebody is going to turn into weeds and all this, right? And so that's in the first story. And in the second, it's a little bit more explicit that there was a garden, and humans were put there to tend it and to keep it. In other words, to preserve it and help it flourish and be its best. And so those are ancient stories, and they point to the fact that humanity as a category, we have a purpose to care for things and to ensure good oversight over the created order. And now each person will have a particular assignment, but we all have that common innate characteristic of needing to care for things. And so whether you have a Jewish, a Christian, a Muslim, or even an atheist orientation to God, I believe that desire is innate in every single person. And then we have a duty to ourselves, and I believe to the rest of humanity, to figure out how do I specifically carry out that general mission of humanity.
So, excuse me. The second part of that question is, as it lies in purpose, and you start to think about if we all agree that no matter what your views or beliefs are, that we're not in control, right? We're not in control of everything around us. And so even if you believe you make your own destiny, that very well may be true, but we can't control the tractor trailer that is coming down the road at 80 mile an hour that might smash into us, right? You can't, there are forces outside of us, right?
Even at the coffee shop or the bank.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So thinking about that in purpose, oftentimes people, when we start to say finding your true purpose, what's your calling? People start to struggle with that. I don't know what my purpose is. I don't know what my calling is. What are your thoughts there about finding your purpose? And it'll be the interview, I think, right before this one, when we release. Another part of that is when you're looking for that purpose, should your purpose be very simple and easy to attain, or is your purpose in life something that is bigger than you think you can possibly do?
Yeah, interesting. Well, let me first say, I think this is a lifelong search or discovery process. So in my 20s, I didn't have a very well refined answer to the question. 30s, maybe it was a little better, etc. One of my professors said a good answer might last you a week or a month, but a good question can last you your whole life. I thought that was wise. But I'll just say it like this. The things that you enjoy and feel most energized by are a pretty good clue. They point in the direction of your purpose. And then we have some innate characteristics. I might really like basketball, but I'm 5'7" on a tall day. NBA is not in my future. Maybe as an equipment manager, but not as a player. But let's just pursue that a little bit more. Maybe I love basketball, but it's obvious I'm not going to be a player. Maybe I should be involved in basketball, but what are the skills, since height isn't one of those characteristics, what are the skills I do have that could help a team succeed or do really well? And maybe it's organizational. I love analyzing the stats. Okay, well, maybe that's a clue to the purpose. Or I'm great at logistics and I love basketball. Oh, maybe you should be a team logistics person. I presume there's a job. They get all their uniforms at the next place, right? And somebody's got to do that. So the things that we care about and that give us the most energy are a clue. Now, if what you love is sitting on TikTok all day, okay, that might be a pastime and not a purpose. But so my point is that these are clues that can point you in the direction of purpose.
So I'm thinking about the person sitting on TikTok all day. And I'm sure as well, if your calling is really to deliver messages and that's how you do it and you're interacting with people, there can be great ways that you can utilize that. So kind of coming all the way back around and thinking about that faith and purpose from a Christian standpoint, from a believer in Christ. Sometimes when I'm talking to Christians and we start to talk about purpose and talk about faith, for the most part, I think everybody thinks, okay, I understand faith. I got to believe in certain things that I can't see and I don't understand, and I do believe in them. But I sometimes feel like many are waiting for the clouds to part and God to verbally, with that real deep booming voice say, your purpose is this. And the other thing that I will mention, John Maxwell just recently said that he himself wants more out of everybody that was in the room than we could ever want for ourselves. But on top of that, God wants more for us than we can ever imagine.
Oh.
And that has stuck with me. And so my question is, looking at it from a Christian standpoint, as a business owner or a leader, how do you develop your purpose and know that you are going after the highest thing in the world? And the last thing I'll say, it's just kind of all popping into my head at one time, But when we start to talk about wealth and abundance and some of those things, which we can touch on then, many times we think about, just the money that is available. But recently I was talking with someone and the question kind of came up. Let's say I have two opportunities in front of me, and one is for $1 million and one is for $10 million. Both align with my purpose. Everything's good, but I can really, I probably only do one. Should I go after the 1 million or should I go after the 10 million? And the answer that came back was you should go after the 30 million, or maybe it was 20 million. I don't remember exactly what, but it was much larger.
Yeah.
And I said, why? And they said, because I want you to go after goals that are so large that when you achieve them, everybody will understand that you weren't responsible for it. God made it happen. It was something that was bigger than you could possibly do on your own. I want people, and John Maxwell talked a little bit about this as well. He said he had a mentor early on say, I want you to achieve something that's so great that people look at you and say, he couldn't have done that. And that's how we keep God at the center of it. So that was a lot of information and a big question, I guess. But what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, I'll try to answer, and it was a lot. So any case, let me say a couple of things. One is I like the idea of aiming really high and engaging the power of God. There's a lot in the New Testament about being co-workers with God, fellow workers. And I love that idea. The Greek word in 2 Corinthians 6:1 is synergeos, like synergy. That's where we get the word synergy from in English, where the 1 + 1 is more than 2. And that's the power of working with God, the things that he cares about, and engaging his power, which is far beyond, of course, ours. So I love the idea of aiming high. At the same time, people have different anointings or different skill levels, and you do sometimes see people overreach. They haven't got the leadership skills to lead 100 people yet. They've got skills to lead 2, and they go for 100 and they can make a mess of things. So there is this law of progression. I think Maxwell even talks about that, like the law of the lid. We've got to raise our leadership level incrementally. And so there's some discernment there. I think it's great to have great goals that you can't achieve right now, but realize there's a skill building that occurs every step of the way. And so that's related to the other part of your question, which is about how do we discover our purpose? And in part, I think we discover it as we go, as we walk forward, as we start a business. And I'll just tell a story of an organization that's really captured my interest lately. It's called Able Electric, and it's in Alabama. The founder's a guy named Josh, who had a story similar to the two guys from the Chicago, the first two. As he tells his story, at 18, he became a bouncer in a bar in Atlanta, and after 3 months, he became a full-time drug dealer. Within 3 years, he had 18 felonies and was doing time in prison. Some guy came in with a church group and did some, once a month ministry or something like this. And Josh learned that he was eligible for work release if he could find a job. And so he asked one of the guys that came in, who had a small electrical shop, if he could come work for him on a work release. In any case, he did. He learned the trade. He completed his time, got out, and within a little while had his master license, electrician license, started an electric company. Over time, he didn't have a great big purpose. He wanted to stay out of the joint, which is a really honorable thing if that's the level you're at. But then as he's doing good work, the company's growing, and he realizes that the people that are coming to him for work, a lot of them are on a recovery journey from substance abuse, and or they're previously incarcerated. And over time, not instantly, over time, it became clear to him that he had the giftings to help lead people who had these tough backgrounds and maybe had some gaps in their skill set, but he could employ them, he could teach them, lead them, etc. He's got 125 employees now, 70% of whom have one of those two or both of those, inhibiting characteristics, substance abuse journey or previously incarceration. It's incredible. He didn't know that when he was sitting in prison that he was going to lead that kind of an organization, but it was revealed to him over time as he worked on the goal in front of him, stay out of prison, get a job. Then as he got better and better, he realized, wow, I can really help a lot of people make a change.
So if I'm understanding correctly, the day we graduate high school, there's not somebody standing on the other side of the stage to hand us a paper that tells us what our purpose is. We had to figure it out along the way. So
it seems that God also lets us figure it out too. There are rare examples, but most of us don't hear the booming voice. Plastics is your future, right?
Correct. And I think it's important. I was making fun of it, or making light of it rather, but it's a journey, right? It's not a destination. It's a journey. And I don't think there is a finish line that you're ever there. You're just constantly evolving and staying in line with your mission. Now, today, and I think that's a good segue, today you spend a fair amount of time through C12 working with Christian businesses. And I'll give you a moment in a second to maybe explain a little bit of what C12 is. But I do have a question that I think is important. Do Christian businesses have trouble just like any other business? And are their troubles any different than any other business?
Well, I think everybody knows the answer that, yeah, we all have troubles, right? Every business needs to have good product or service. You got to have marketing and sales. You got to have excellent financial management, and you got people. And almost more than half of the questions that every business leader I talk to that they want to talk about is about people, because people are complicated. We need the people to accomplish the mission, and they have their own opinions, they have their own failings, they have their own characteristics, and that's what makes life interesting, let's say, in business. Now, are Christian business leaders exposed or encumbered by a different set of problems? Maybe, and I'll say why. It's because many of them have a conviction that they have a debt not only to their company, but they have an obligation to represent God well. In other words, they have some kind of a burden to not only run a great business, but to run it for a greater purpose. And we all need to work that out for ourselves, just like I was talking about with purpose. But that is an extra layer of consideration and thought process that some Christian business leaders have to filter through. Now, do we have extra help? I think we can if we're aligned with God. But that is an extra layer of responsibility, if you will.
So to kind of parlay on that, can Christian beliefs in the Bible and everything that you've just talked about, can they mix with any business? Obviously, I guess that's a loaded question. There are a few businesses out there that maybe, don't. But can Christian values and business go hand in hand, or are they two things that are completely foreign to each other, and you got to forget about one to do the other? Because I feel like sometimes that is what is in people's minds, which was kind of back to the question that we had at the beginning. And then out of that, maybe you can move into what C12 does and how they fit those things together.
Yeah. Well, back to that, when I told the stories from Genesis, my version of them, that human beings were put on the earth to take care of it, to steward it. One of the ways that we organize that process is through business. Business is the mechanism by which we organize multiple people towards a single goal to serve each other. And in a free market system like we generally have in the United States, we get people to voluntarily give us money in exchange for a good or a service. And, Jesus said, give and it will be given to you. The value creation cycle starts with a gift. That's why the guys in jail who had a taking mentality, it just doesn't work. The system of giving and then receiving is built into the fabric of the universe by its creator as the way that we prosper. When we provide good value to other people who can voluntarily choose to respond or not respond, that's an amazing thing. And so business is perfectly aligned with the way that God wants us to work. Give great value, receive great value in return. We're not trying to extract things from our customers. If we are, then we're messed up. We're wrong. We're trying to give great value. And in response, people will give us money or attention.
So what about the person that maybe is thinking, I'm in a taking mentality, but it's okay because I'm going to take for the right reasons. I'm a Robin Hood. I'm going to take and give to the poor. Does that model work? Or I'm going to take for the time being because I feel that I have to, but eventually I'm going to change and I'm going to give.
That doesn't work. It will not result in good outcomes. No, just think about, you've mentioned abundance a couple of times, and my company is called Abundant Thought Revolution. And that comes from the Gospel of John, where in chapter 10, where Jesus says, I came that they might have life and have it more abundantly. And then he talks about his role, how he's giving himself for the benefit of the world. I'm the good shepherd, lay down my life. The key to abundance is giving. And if I'm going to be a taker, just for a season or for the right reason, Robin Hood, no, that is a short circuit to people not trusting you, not liking you, not wanting to be around you, avoiding you, talking bad, right? It's just all of the outcomes of that are rotten. They're bad. They're not abundant. They tend towards poverty and loneliness.
Now, last question on that vein. What about the business owner manager that is out there that realizes they're sitting there, they're listening, and they realize, all right, I'm in a taking mode. Maybe I'm a manager of 10 people and I realize I'm really, I didn't intend to be, but I am in that taking mode because all I'm doing is going to work every day and figuring out how I can get more out of my people and I'm not giving them anything. What are some actionable steps for them to start to change that process?
Yeah. So Jesus said this system works. I'm saying it works. I suggest you do an experiment. Figure out what is it you're doing right now that's maybe a little more taking than giving, and run a month-long experiment. If it's true that this stuff works, let's put it to the test. Try being more generous. Figure out specific actions that you might do to pour into the people that work for you. Figure out what they like and bring them their favorite food, or write each one of them a personalized thank you note. I just appreciate your contribution, or help them get their job done, or whatever it might be. Try giving for a month and see if results aren't better. And maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah,
maybe you should just try to extract everything.
I already give. I give them a paycheck. What else could they want? I mean, they're getting a pay and I'm asking them to do something. Why should I be extra nice to them? I'm already writing a check to them.
Well, you asked a question, what else could they want? That's a good question to ask them. Maybe they want a purposeful job, one that aligns with their sense of well-being or mission? What if they want good relations at work, or they come to work because they care about people, or they love your customers? Or that's a really good thing to ask them. They're the experts on what they want.
You said something there. Is it okay? And should you go to your employees and try to understand them a little bit and understand what their personal mission is so that you can see how they fit into your company? I mean, is that okay?
I don't know how you can lead people without knowing that. I think it's mandatory.
So you said something there. So maybe some people are just managing people, things, hours, products, and they're not actually leading their staff. And maybe there, I think, is kind of a great thought that if you're listening and thinking, oh man, I'm struggling with some of these things, maybe start to think about, are you really managing? And the difference between managing and leadership is leaders inspire others to do things, whereas managers are just managing the things that are happening. They're more concerned about who's going to be here tomorrow on the busy day and those types of things, as opposed to inspiring people to want to be there an extra day because somebody's off or something of that nature, I think.
Well, let's go back to the garden example that I brought up some time ago. And imagine you have different types of plants in your yard. Hostas, they don't like bright sun. And I don't know, petunias do. I could be wrong about that. I'm not great at gardening. But if I'm going to be a good gardener, I need to understand, what do the plants need? And plants are a whole lot simpler than people. And so if I'm going to be a good leader in my team, my organization, my business, I need to understand, what does Susie need in order to feel good, to succeed, to feel like she's flourishing, to contribute her best? And what does Bob need? And what does Stefan need, et cetera? I don't know how you can manage. You can't tend a garden without knowing what the plants need. How could you lead a team without knowing what each human being needs?
I would agree. And I've always said people are all different, but they're predictably different if you take the time to get to know them. Yeah. And that can help tremendously. So I wanted to make sure we touched on one other piece, which is thinking about personal growth and daily routines and your thinking. How can creating a daily routine set you up for success? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, if we use a default method of starting our day, it probably will not lead to great outcomes. So in other words, I just encourage people to think about, you wake up and then what? You maybe use the bathroom. Are you looking at your phone in the bathroom? Are you letting bad news, negative media exposure, rage, clickbait come into your brain at the beginning of your day? And so whether you're a person of faith or not, I encourage everybody to have a daily routine that starts with some quiet, that starts with some reflection about the day. What is my day going to look like? How do I want it to turn out? I'm thinking about the meetings that I'm going to have and who are the people I'm likely to interact with. What would be the best way for me to be? How do I want to be in those meetings? If you do have a faith tradition, to spend some time in ancient texts. These things have stood the test of time and been found valuable by generations and generations of people before us. And if you can get outside, that's awesome too. Because think about it, even in the biggest office environment, your longest line of sight might be 80 feet across a big room. Whereas if you go outside, you can literally see maybe a mile or two, or even far. If you're in Kansas, maybe you could see 10 miles, right? And it literally expands our vision. And so I think that the way that we've used phones and the information age has really caused us to have a higher level of anxiety and lower level of intentionality about our lives. And I think that starting the day with, I do an hour but other people may have, different constraints. But start with some intentional time in quiet without any negative or rapidly moving inputs. We need to start the day with intentionality, peace, and silence.
I recently heard a story about a daily prayer that was, Lord, I give thanks that today, I've not done anything bad. I've not used any swear words. I've not eaten any chocolate. I've not coveted anything. But in a few minutes, I'm going to need a lot more help because I haven't got out of bed yet. And
right.
Anyhow, I thought that was kind of comical. Last question on routines. What about this? So let's say you set up a routine and you find it to be very valuable. I'm sure you have a morning routine. What happens when, you had to push yourself? I recently had an experience. I was going to a conference. Everything was late getting me there. So I didn't get there till like 3:00 in the morning, and the conference started at 8:00 in the morning. So I got a few hours of sleep, and that morning was a struggle because I couldn't get my daily routine in for me. How do you handle when those things happen? Do you let it ruin your day? Do you, how do you come out of that?
Yeah. Well, that just shows you the value of your good morning routine, right? Because you notice it, you miss it when you don't have it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Life's going to happen. And I've had those experiences as well, of course. A kid's up all night, or, just life happens. My encouragement is to get back on the horse as soon as you can. Some people sort of turn it into this guilt trip, and then they feel bad about themselves. Hey, you know what? You are a human being in a world with lots of external variables. Do your best. Get back into it tomorrow if you can. But I will ask God for extra help if I haven't had that time. God, that I missed my time, and I don't want to do anything that's going to hurt other people because of, my schedule.
I like it. So before we hit the last little section here, I want to make sure I have room for you. Where can people find out more information about you if they want to get involved, or get in contact with you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, well, the best place is a website called Abundant Thought Revolution, abundantthoughtrevolution.com. So there's insights from my wife and me. There's videos that we've done. You can also pre-order my book. I've got a book coming out at the end of 2025 called Thinking for Success, and it's 52 stories that help us to realign our thinking, and it's really designed to be used in staff meetings. There's 52, so that, one a week for a year, and it's a great tool to help adjust our thinking and to get a team aligned together. They have a catchy title, and so you can, once you've gone through the story in the future, then you can just refer to that title and say, "Oh, hey, Julie, it sounds like your mobile is bouncing around," and that will refer back to the mobile story. And it's a really helpful tool for all of us to think better and therefore produce better outcomes.
I like it. And I will say it right now. If you are interested in December of 2025, after your release, maybe we can get you back on and we can talk a little bit about the book that has just come out.
Well, Amos, I'll send you a reader's copy in advance, and I'll get you a physical copy as soon as they're available. Sounds great.
Awesome. So we end every episode with kind of a rapid fire 3 questions. And the first question, it just comes from many, many conversations over the years of hearing things like when students are graduating today, they don't have this, or when I was in school, we learned this and they don't today. And I thought, what a great opportunity to ask leadership experts from around the world. If we could have all of the school administrators from across the world sitting in front of us, and you had 30 seconds to give them one piece of advice of something that they could add into curriculum or into the schools that would help to turn out better, more well-rounded potential leaders of the future, what would that be?
Mandatory personal finance classes.
I like it. You were absolutely correct on that one. I think that's something that is missing.
We graduate people who can do Algebra 2, but not balance a checkbook or understand compound interest.
Yep. I like it. Second question. Over the years, what has been your go-to book that you've continually went back to that has continually given you inspiration?
Well, it probably won't surprise you, but I read something from the Bible every day.
Absolutely.
Ancient wisdom.
And I liked what you said earlier, that it's been found useful by generations. And that's just a nice way of thinking about that. Last question is, in today's amazing world of technology, what is your favorite and most useful piece of technology today?
Wow. You know, it's become so integrated into our lives. It's almost hard to remember life without it. I'll tell you, I remember the first time I heard an email address that people were using. I was listening to the radio in college, and the radio host said, "Hey, we now have a new way for you to communicate with us. We have something called electronic mail." And the radio station had one email address, and you could email everybody if you had such a tool. So I know we complain about email a lot because we still don't quite know how to use it. We've only been dealing with it for 30 years or whatever. I think that's a really good tool because we can schedule when they're going to go out. It's searchable. So I've got a whole bunch of paper books on the shelf there. I can't search any of them without standing up and flipping page by page. I don't know. That was just the first thing that came to my mind, Amos, but it's really revolutionized how quickly we can interact with other people.
I like it. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been a lot of fun talking. We appreciate you coming on, and hopefully we'll get you back on here in December.
Oh, thanks, Amos. My pleasure. I hope it was a blessing to the listeners.
Awesome. And for our listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to check out our past episodes, and don't forget to follow us on whatever platform you're listening so that you get alerts when new episodes come out. Until next time, we appreciate you.